Hello, everyone, and welcome back to season 4 of the SPEMA Council podcast. My name is Jackson Prelli, and I'm one of your co-hosts for this season, as well as the podcast producer and social media manager. Joining us on the hosting side today, we have Anaya Pitt, who's one of our events team members, and as well, we have Madeline Grossi, who is our podcast administrator and co-host. I'll now throw over to Maddie to introduce our guest today.
Thanks, Jackson. So today we have Nico. Nico is the current manager of communications and media relations at Forge FC. He graduated from Laurentian University with a Bachelor of Commerce in Sports Administration. Nico completed an internship with the Hamilton Sports Group as the communications intern, which includes Forge FC and the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He then moved on to find roles within both organizations in full-time positions and has a wealth of knowledge in the sports industry. We welcome Nico as the 19th guest here on the SPEMA Council podcast.
Thank you guys for having me.
Actually, I think you're 20th. I think I forgot to change that. I think you're 20th.
I'll take 19 and
20. So we can jump right into it. But as I mentioned there, you kind of did an internship in the same organization. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about like a key takeaway or lesson that you learned from your internship that could be useful for other students to know and maybe use themselves.
Yeah, so I did my internship in 2019. At that time, I think Forge had just joined, like the CPL had just become a thing, Forge had just become a thing. So I got lucky for that opportunity. That part of the reason why I got that role was the people that were all there were very football minded and they didn't understand soccer as much as I did. So when I applied, one of the main things that they asked me, they're like, how much do you know about soccer? And I got pretty lucky to say like the coach of the team used to be my coach, and they're like, okay, like that helps a lot. So so I guess that kind of ties into like my first kind of takeaway from all those things is really connections in sports is almost everything. Like the connections that you make through every single event that you go to, every single game is gonna take you such a long way within the sports industry. So for example, my connections kind of got me into the job in the first place. After that, all of my connections that I built within the organization. So from there, I didn't just stop with like, oh, like I know the coach, like I'm done networking. It's like, no, like now I'm in the organization. So now go network with everybody from within there, build a good name for yourself, work hard and everything. And as you build those connections and make a name for yourself and people like you, whether I wanted to leave, whether I wanted to stay, I had those connections that knew the kind of work that I did that could help me get to kind of the next stage. So I think that was probably my biggest takeaway. But I think a second takeaway that I think a lot of interns should, in any role, really have is that when people bring you in as interns, one of the biggest things that they want is like they know that you're going to be able to do the basic work that they give you. It's never too difficult. They already have a routine on how it goes. So they'll walk you through all of those things that they already know. But one of the best things that you can get, whether you're an intern or a new hire, is kind of a new perspective on like the things that you're currently doing. So for example, when I came in, a lot of the communications that we do is with traditional media. So traditional media being TV, radio, newspapers. So to branch out of that, communications is always growing. As an intern, I was a little bit scared to sort of pitch ideas and stuff like that at first, but when my manager was kind of like, no, like you're an intern, like we want you to pitch ideas, like we want you to take on your own task because it's going to help us grow and it's going to help you grow as a professional. So I think that's the biggest thing is that whatever you have in mind, like don't be scared to pitch it. Like the people that are managing you should want you to grow because in turn it's going to help the organization grow as well if you're growing.
No, and that's great because I know in even some of our classes, we've had people come in and talk, and they love interns because interns bring new ideas because they're trying to figure out how to market towards our age group. And they're like, somebody from your age group says, oh, I think that's a good idea. Probably not just thinking alone. So I know that's like interns should definitely speak their mind. And if you have an idea, just say it.
Exactly. It's huge. I think anybody, there's always going to be a fear when you try something new, but I think that feeling of being uncomfortable should be normal when you go into new jobs. Honestly, you should almost want to feel uncomfortable. If you walk into a new job and it's too easy for you and you're like, oh, like I'm comfortable here, like I'm not challenged, it means like something's probably not going right, especially if you're an intern. Like you should feel like there's a challenge going on,
Mhm.
that there's a problem that you need to solve. And like with that, like adversity, I'm going to call it, even though it's not necessarily adversity, but like with those challenges, that's how you're going to learn. You're going to learn by doing something and failing, or doing something and doing it very well, and then coming together as a group and saying like, okay, this went well. Like, why did it go well? Can we do this again in the future, kind of thing.
And I always say that like taking those risks and asking those questions and pitching those ideas, like the worst thing that somebody's gonna say is no, and at least you kind of you shot your shot, right? So
Exactly.
that's how I look at it too, because if you don't try, then you'll never know what the answer was, and the worst you already know what the worst is gonna be. So
Exactly. And the worst thing that could also happen from that is, let's say you did have a good idea, you never pitch it, all of a sudden somebody else pitched it in the future, and not necessarily they're going to get credit for your idea or anything like that, but they go forward with that. Like
mhm.
now that's something that you could have done, but you were just too scared to do it. So it's just, don't be scared, just go off and do it.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Something I like to go by is I try to do things that I won't regret, right? Because if you don't take those opportunities, it's a way worse feeling to regret it than to say, "Oh, I did it, but it didn't work out." So that's how I
Exactly.
think about it.
Yeah.
And then just another question for you. So you do work in the communications department. So how did you find your passion like for communications? Like, did you have like an experience when you were younger, or just kind of like always had that little interest in there?
Honestly, it was kind of interesting. I think my whole life I always played soccer. Soccer was always my main thing. Obviously, you love watching like the broadcast stuff and everything like that. I think no matter what sport you watch, whether it's hockey, you have Hockey Night in Canada. When it's soccer, you have, like, for me, like I always loved the Spanish league commentator that commented over all of Messi's games, because just like the words he would come up with while going with it, like you fall in love with those things. So I just fell in love with like almost one aspect of it. Like I didn't even understand what all of communications necessarily entailed until I got to university. So I even went, like when I first went to Laurentian, I originally applied under kinesiology, and then I took a victory lap and then ended up going to Laurentian. Then I was in sports admin, and I was like, okay, like if I'm here, like what am I going to go into? Operations, finance, marketing. And then I didn't even know there was like sports communications really. And then I went and I took a sports communications class at the university, and I was like, this is like fantastic. Like this is the kind of stuff that I love. Like I also always knew I didn't necessarily have the creative touch of like being able to do my own digital design and stuff like that. So being able to work with somebody to like come up with those ideas and see somebody else come up with sort of ideas that I had because I knew I couldn't do it was another thing that sort of brought me to it. But to full circle around to the question, it's basically I took a class in university, and then it just sparked everything, and it kind of opened up what communications was. And from there, I just continued to pursue it.
Oh, it's a great story. I mean, because I know even like here, that's what like Brock tries to do. Because you got to take marketing, you got to take sponsorship, you got to take finance, human resources. Like they try to like give you everything possibly in the industry, because you never know where that interest may spark from. It may spark from a volunteer opportunity, it may spark from a job, but most time it does spark from just sitting in a lecture and you just enjoy the content.
Exactly. I think a lot of the times too, it just comes from a certain prof that like hits this what you're sort of interested in the right way. I had a prof there called JP Rains at Laurentian, and he did a lot of our. So he did one of the sports communications classes. Can't remember, he did a few others, but I can't. Sports media, something else. And when I was in those classes with him, it just seemed to like connect. And every single class, it was like something new that I wasn't even thinking about doing, or something that I didn't even know that you really needed going into this sort of industry. And just little things like that, when all of a sudden you pick up all this stuff, you're like, wow, like there's so much more within all of these different fields, whether it's finance, operations, communications, that you don't really know about until you sit through some of these classes or sit through some of your internships, or just get that experience out there, that you're like, wow, like there's so much more than meets the eye when it comes to this stuff.
I've said that too before, like here and like just from learning at school, like I was always a huge sports fan, and like that's what kind of led me down to be in sport management. And I went to like a sport focused high school, and I loved going to live events and like all of that. But since I've started to study in the program and then continue to go to live events, like the gears just start to turn, and every time I'm at an event, I think so much more like in depth and like critically about the event, and all I think is like, well, like, what's that person doing? And how did that get here? And who had to do that? And what's that activation? And like all of the gears start to turn, and I don't just go to enjoy the event anymore. There's like so much that's going on in my brain, like in that sport management aspect.
It's funny because that doesn't change even when you start to get jobs in there. Like I went to a Raptors game recently, and as I was walking around, so I was there with my girlfriend, and I just started pulling out my phone and taking pictures of like cool things that they were doing, and I was like this is stuff that like we could do around our stadium as well, or like this is
Yeah.
like interesting communication stuff that we can do. And it's just one of those things. It's so different because my girlfriend's like, I'm here to watch the game. Like I don't care what's going on over there. And I was like, no. Like I love everything that's going on with the stadium. I was at Little Caesars Arena. I went to go watch the Raptors versus the Pistons, and even there, I was like, look at all this like cool stuff they have around here. Like you could include all of this stuff, and just all of a sudden you go, and although you love the sport, like you start to fall in love with everything that entails the sport, and because you understand everything a little bit more, you're like, oh, they're doing this for this and this reason, or they're doing
Yeah,
that for this and this reason. It's just you fall in love with the weirdest little things after you're around it for so long.
for sure.
Sometimes when I watch Raptors games, I count all the sponsors I see on my screen just for fun, because now I know what that means.
It's funny again, those little things, they just pop up to people like us that are in this sort of that want to pursue that career, and just those little things are so entertaining to us now, almost like more entertaining than games sometimes. It's funny.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. Well, my question for you, Nico, is what would you say is the biggest challenge that you face when managing communications and media within the industry? So, what's the kind of hardest part about your job?
I would say the hardest part about our job is navigating change, but like
Mhm.
the hardest part is also the most entertaining part, which is like the fun part about being in sports is that sports is always changing. And when you look at communications, like compare the kind of media that we would have taken in now compared to like what they took in 20 years ago. You know, like 20 years ago, you didn't have Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, like all those things where like our generations like flock to that. They love that sort of stuff now. That's where they're picking up. So like they're picking up news sources from like Twitter and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Well, in the past, it would have been like, no, like I'm gonna go like check out like the newspaper. I'm gonna go look at the magazine that I subscribe to. I'm gonna go watch TV and watch CBC and stuff like that. Well, now you still have people that do that sort of thing, but you need to look at how am I going to integrate the sort of stuff we're doing already that's working and somehow navigate that and make it work with the social media platforms, with all these different communication sources coming out, like even like stuff like Snapchat. Like how are we going to run our ads through Snapchat? How are we going to run our ads through Instagram? How are we going to run our ads through Google? Do we want to run our ads through all of these things? Is this our demographic? Like just that constant change. And like in 5 years, we're going to have a new social media source that we're going to use. Like
Mhm.
before we had Vine, now we have TikTok. Before we had like MySpace and we have Facebook. Facebook was popular. Now Twitter's like it's crazy. Everything's always changing, right? So you have to learn how to navigate all of those things and to properly utilize them. Which is where we come back to the interns. Like sometimes the interns have way more knowledge than we do on those sort of platforms. So when
Mhm.
you guys come in and you're like, oh, like we should do this and this is why it makes sense and I can do this sort of thing, like we're gonna be like, yeah, like we love it. Go do it. Like we want to see you guys do that stuff.
I think it's funny now too. I always laugh like when you see or like job descriptions or when you're like applying for a job and it says like strong skills in like social media or something along those lines, because like we all use social media every day and we use those platforms. So I'm like, well, yeah, I know how to use like Instagram and Twitter and all those things, but like so like I could put out a post every day. Like it's just funny that those are like some qualifications, I think, because our generation uses those every day just as like fun platforms and like where we go to get our information and like see what our friends are doing.
Yeah.
So I find that interesting.
And like the top, like, and even on top of that, it's something that like we're all still learning about it. Like we're still learning about what's the most effective way to use all of those things, and
Yeah.
like how are we going to track our data from there? Like what analytics are we going to look at specifically that are going to be like our key performance indicators of how well a post is doing? Like is it this post has this many views? Is it this post has this many interactions? Like all of those different things you sort of start to look at and you're like, okay, with all of these things, like how do we make it successful across all platforms? How are we going to measure this across all platforms? And just crazy stuff like that. That's always changing. That, like, again, like I said, like a week from now, we could have a new app that's going to blow up the world, and we're going to be like, okay, like, how are we going to use that app and like use it as an asset for a company?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we like to have some fun on here too and talk about, like some of your memories and some of the best experiences that you've had in the industry. So maybe could you explain like one of your favorite moments or memories that you've had within like the Hamilton Sports Group organization, whether that be with the Tiger Cats or Forge FC, maybe like just in a game or a moment that stands out to you.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have quite a few different ones from here. I think the few years that I've been here, we've done a whole lot around the stadium. But I'll give you one from each team. So with Forge, I'm obviously a lot more involved in, just being the manager there. And I think my biggest moment was, so for the bigger competitions we play in. So we have the CPL, which is the leagues, but we kind of have an understanding that I don't need to travel with the team as they go through all those things unless it's for like playoffs or stuff like that. But for bigger competitions like CONCACAF Champions League, I get to travel with the team and sort of go through some of those experiences with them.
Mm.
So 2 years ago, 2021, yes, 2021, our team qualified for something called CONCACAF Champions League, which is like the biggest competition in North America for soccer,
Mm.
as far as club teams go. And when I was there, we got to travel to Mexico and play against one of the most like renowned Mexican clubs like in the world. And like for someone like me who's followed soccer for a long time, I was like this is unbelievable. Like this is crazy. So the team we were playing was Cruz Azul, and the stadium they play at is at the Estadio Azteca, which, like, if you're a soccer mind, that's it's like the holy grail. Like it's pretty up there. Like I walked into that stadium and I almost like started to cry. Like it just being like a kid, like a little bit different. I dreamed of playing on the field. Obviously, I wasn't playing, but like just being able to like touch the field, like someone that, like, for me, like Diego Maradona played on that pitch. Like the World Cup was played there. The national team that I follow, so Uruguay, played there. The Canadian national team just had their game there like the other year, which was amazing. Like just all the stories that come with that field, and then all of a sudden, like, Forge FC is ingrained into the history of Estadio Azteca, and like I got to be a part of it. It was just like, I even now talking about it, like I almost like get choked up about it, because like it's just so special being a part of something like that, that you, in the moment, you almost take it a little bit for granted, but like after you're done and like you realize like what you just did, you're like, this is like unbelievable, like this is crazy. And I think a lot of the times people miss out on those moments sometimes because they forget to take a step back and like just breathe and really enjoy the moment. But like when you do take that step, you're almost like, holy cow, like I was a part of this, like this is like crazy.
Yeah.
So that's my big one for the Forge. My Ticats one isn't as heartfelt as that one, unfortunately. But with the Ticats, my favorite memory was actually, we got to go play the Argos. This was my 2019 internship year, and my director at the time, Aaron Gogashvili, he would always bring the intern to like that one game against the Argos because it was close by. So he gave me the opportunity to go travel and see another team's press box and see how we work through an away day game and everything like that. So we go to the game and we get up to the press box, and they were like, like, we actually don't have space for me and like the coordinator at the time. So they put us in like a separate booth. And while you're up in the press box, you're not supposed to be cheering. But we were in a booth like all the way down that like they couldn't hear us. So that was the game. I think Ticat, it's like one of the biggest Ticats wins like ever. Like we won like 54 or like 60 to like 7 or something crazy like that. And me and the coordinator at the time, right at the end of the game, there's a missed field goal by like the Argos, and we're all sitting down. Speedy B grabs the ball and he starts to run it all the way back. And we're screaming in the press box all the way at the end, just going wild. And as we're screaming, we both hold each other, like, oh shit, like we can't be screaming. And then we like looked around, and we're like, oh, we can scream, it's fine. So we started cheering again and everything like that. So it's just like one of those just moments again that like it will always stick with me. It was just such a funny moment. And again, like, although maybe not the biggest moment in history, like it was still a pretty big moment because it was like our biggest ever win against like the Argos and stuff like that. So just something like that, it just sits with you. And when you don't sit down and really take it in, like all of a sudden you sit down and you do, and you're like, wow, like I was there for that. Like that was pretty incredible. And I have some funny stories from it too. So just stuff like that. It's just I love that stuff.
Yeah, I love that.
And then I kind of have a two-part question for you. So, as you said, you're a big soccer fan. So, TFC just kicked off their season. So, first part of the question, what's your prediction for TFC this year? What are you kind of like looking forward to seeing, just watching them? And then, second part of the question, I know the CPL kicks off, I believe it's mid-April. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what are you looking most forward to for this season with the Forge FC?
Yeah, so to answer the TFC part first, I think they'll probably have a good year. I think it's difficult to say they won't after you bring in the players that you do. I mean, Bernadeschi, you have Insigne, guys like Richie Larea who were on the national team and playing with like Nottingham Forest at the time come back and play. Just like kind of guys like that, you expect them to have a pretty good season. Being biased, I want them to go pretty far in the Canadian Championship. So we cross paths one day and we get to play them again here at Tim Hortons Field or something. I always love playing the MLS teams with the CPL team because it just has a different sort of feeling just around the stadiums when it comes to those sort of things. It's like a David versus Goliath kind of thing. So
Yeah.
being the biased one myself, I want to see the two teams clash at some point. But I think TFC should do well. I hope they do well. I hope all the Canadian teams do well. I think it's time that Canada, like Canadian soccer as a whole, just really start to cement themselves around the world as like teams that can really push other teams, whether it's the MLS, whether it's the national team, whether it's the CPL going far in their own competitions, Canadian Championship, CONCACAF Champions League, just sort of that kind of thing, just pushing it as far as we can. And as far as the CPL season goes, I think this season will probably be the most competitive season we've seen so far in the CPL. We recently, I think yesterday, we announced the new playoff format that they're going through and everything like that. So that'll be interesting. But teams are going through all this change. Teams are starting to realize what level you really need to play at to be in the CPL. So I think there's a lot more, blanking on this word, but it's a lot more even just across the league. So you're going to see teams play up to each other's levels and really having these tight competitive games throughout the whole year, which is a positive thing because I think the CPL is a league that doesn't get the recognition that it deserves quite yet, but understandable. It's only 5 years old. So the more people like tune in and realize like, wow, like there's a place where all these great Canadians are playing. Like that's what I look forward to the most. It's just the recognition that it hopefully gets.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I know CPL is just new, so hopefully you're right and it starts to get some more recognition and grow. Just to have a good Canadian soccer league within the country.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so this last question here, just to wrap it up, it kind of ties into what you were just saying, but what is something that you think makes the CPL stand out? Even though it is a newer league, and like you said, it's only 5 years old, but what do you think is a feature that it has that makes it special compared to other leagues in Canada?
I think the thing that makes it so special, it's that this is gonna sound so like slogan like, but it's a league made by Canadians for Canadians. You know what I mean? So for example, the MLS, although it accepts Canadians within the leagues, if you are a Canadian player and you are trying to make it in the MLS, you only count as like a national team spot or like a national player on the Canadian teams. So if you go to one of the American teams, you count as an international. So like that limits the amount of opportunities that Canadians really get to reach the pro level. Before the CPL, there was nowhere really for them to go. Like if you were a Canadian trying to pursue a career, unless you were the top, even 1%, I won't even say top 5%, like the top 1%, even lower than 1%, you had almost like no chance of making it as a professional. Or if you had like dual citizenship. So if you're a Canadian with an American passport, an Italian passport, a European passport, let's say, then all of a sudden that's the opportunities you got. But now here, the CPL opens up and you have a league that's dominated by Canadians. Like it's all here for the Canadians. Canadians are here. Canadians that are 24 years old now are getting an opportunity and not being told like, hey, you have to retire after university. Like there's nowhere for you to go anymore. Like there's an opportunity now. And I think just seeing that sort of thing is just, it's beautiful to see being a kid that was so young and thinking that I wouldn't have a lot of opportunities. Like now I get to look at kids in the future that are going to have that opportunities. My kids in the future are going to have the opportunity to play in this sort of league. And hopefully by that time, like it's even bigger than what it is now. And like, it just continues to grow. And Canadians really buy into the fact that like, we have something special here going with Canadian soccer. National team makes a World Cup. You have your own league. The MLS teams are still popping around. Like it's the golden era, and I just hope we take advantage of it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. I think, sorry, go ahead, Naya.
It's okay. I was just gonna say it definitely helps that the Canadian men's team made the World Cup, just to kind of push that love for soccer and refuel it within Canadians. I think that'll help a lot.
Yeah.
100%.
And the women won a gold medal. So
Yeah, that's
soccer's hot right now, and you know, FIFA is coming to Toronto in the next few years too. So soccer's big and it's growing, and I love it. But Nico, we've had such a great talk here today so far. We've learned about your role and your path throughout the industry, and some of your favorite moments. So we thank you for your time today, Jackson and I and Anaya. We thank you for joining us and your time. But we like to give the guests the final word and the floor before we close it off. So on behalf of us, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Obviously, you guys all seem like a great group of, well, students. I was going to say kids, but obviously you guys aren't kids. You guys might be working with me in the next couple of years. So I'll say colleagues of the sports industry. And I hope all you guys just continue to pursue your like dreams, your careers and everything like that. Although it may be a long, daunting task to be in sports, it's worth it. So just push, work hard. And I can definitely tell you guys will make it far in the sports industry.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Have a good day, guys.
See ya.